wonder how records and other necessary documents are stored? Well, that is what archival description is for. Here are the main points to be discussed throughout the video. First, its introduction and importance. Second, the different archival description standards. Third is the ISA-G. Fourth, records in context. And fifth, its challenges and limitations.
We have learned that archives are records in various formats and are preserved for their enduring value. But how do we explain the context and content of archival materials? Or why do we even describe them in the first place? This and a lot more concepts will be covered as we discuss archival description. Archival description involves the process of capturing, collating, analyzing, and organizing information to identify and explain the context, content, and structure in order to promote its accessibility. It allows us to determine how they are related with other records and understand the ways in which they can be found and used. For example, you wanted to know what purpose does manungol jar serve in the past. Access to the needed information can be provided with the use of retrievable description. The abundance of information an archival material can provide, or the lack of it, requires rules and guidelines that will keep the description uniform and consistent. These mutually agreed upon rules, guidelines, and specifications will govern how archival description will be carried out. However, due to the contextuality of description, there is no single standard to cover all archival collections and institutions. The following standards are examples for better representation. One of the earliest standards that came to being is created by the Working Group on Standards for Archival Description, a group established by the Society of American Archivists. The WGSAD created a matrix with 3 dimensions: the strength of the standard, the primary developer of the standard, and the levels of description. The strength of the standards give out standards with varying rigidity, ranging from the most restrictive, like which set of characters to be used, up to the most permissive, just like the set of practices or service criteria which will be used to measure products or programs. The second dimension of the matrix is the primary developer of the standard, which focuses on the proponents of the standards in use. There are those external standards which are developed outside the archival profession. The last dimension is the levels of description, which looks into the scope of description from the broadest up to the most specific. The Bureau of Canadian Archivists also created their own standard, which they call Rules for Archival Description, or RAD. RAD uses multi-level description to help archivists determine what information to capture and how to present it, including authorized punctuation formats. The following are the levels that increase its specificity as we go down. The Australian series system, on the other hand, separated descriptive information about the creators of records from information about the records themselves. This approach rejected the rigidities of the record group approach to archival description. Aside from the aforementioned standards, there are a lot more that are used for different purposes and formats. Encoded archival description, for example, is a description standard used to encode finding aids in an online environment.
ISA-G, or the General International Standard Archival Description, is a content model that was developed by the ICA. Did you know that it is available in 16 languages? It is also an international standard which provides guidelines for creating the content. This standard contains general rules for archival description that may be applied irrespective of the form or medium of the archival material. It is part of a process that will ensure consistent, appropriate, and self-explanatory descriptions, enable the sharing of authority data for accessibility, and empower the integration into a unified information system. All the 26 rules are organized into 7 areas of descriptive information. First is the identity statement area, where essential information is conveyed to identify the unit of description. Second is the context area that sustains about the origin and custody of the unit of description. Third is the content and structure area, which states about the subject matter and arrangement of the unit of description. Fourth is the condition of access and use area that tells about the availability of the unit of description. Fifth is the allied materials area, which conveys about the materials having an important relationship to the unit of description. Next is the note area, where other and specialized information may be conveyed. And lastly, the description control area that states on how, when, and by whom the archival description was prepared. Here are the core elements that are considered essential for international exchange of descriptive information. First is the reference code. Its purpose is to identify uniquely the unit of description and to provide a link to the description that represents it. The elements that must be recorded are the country code, repository code, and a specific local reference code, control number, or other unique identifier. The next core element is the title. Its purpose is to name the unit of description. In here, the archivist must provide either a formal title or a concise supplied title in accordance with the rules of multi-level description and national conventions. The next core element is the creator. In here, the purpose is to identify the creator or creators of the unit of description. The archivist must record the name of the organization or the individual who are responsible for the creation, accumulation, and maintenance of the records in the unit of description. The name should be given in the standardized form as prescribed by the international or national conventions in accordance with the principles of ISAAR. For the next core element is the date. Its purpose is to identify and record the dates of the unit of description. The archivist must record at least one of the following types of dates, which is first, the date when records were accumulated in the transaction of business or the conduct of affairs, or the dates when documents were created. The next core element is the extent of the unit of description. Its purpose is to identify and describe first, the physical or logical extent, and second, the medium of the unit of description. In here, the archivist must record the extent of the unit of description by giving the number of physical or logical units in Arabic numerals. There are also what we call the archival materials elements. First is the intellectual elements, which describe the content of the archival materials, including the title, arrangement, function and use, scope and content, dates, control numbers, access and use, restrictions, and other access points such as geography, language, subject, and record types. Next is the physical occurrence elements, which describe the physical characteristics for each copy or version of the archival materials. This includes the amount, containers, location, and reference unit. Third is the media occurrence elements that includes the media type, color, dimensions, piece count, and reproduction count, and as well as the format and processes used to make the media itself. For the next core element, we have the level of description. Its purpose is to identify the level of arrangement of the unit of description. In here, the archivist must record the level of this unit of description. Here are some examples: fonts, subfonts, series, subseries, file, and item. RIC is the successor currently in development. Records in context embodies both phases of the principle of provenance, which are respect the fonts and respect for original order. It is based on intellectual and practical critique of archival description. It has two products. First is the Conceptual Model for Archival Description, or RICCM, and an Ontology for Archival Description, or RICO. The Conceptual Model for Archival Description, or RICCM, shows diagrams that illustrate how the components are interrelated to form a complete archival description. It is a document that frames the current practices and systems while providing a basis for their ongoing development, which enables archivists to collaborate with other information professionals. While, on the other hand, an Ontology for Archival Description, or RICO, is basically a machine-readable and formal version of the conceptual model. It is a tool for wider integration of archival description that will enable the archival community to participate on its own terms, having the opportunity for testing and community feedback.
However detailed and organized archival description may seem, it still has its own limitations. The hierarchical format and structure of description have raised concerns on its rigid nature. Another challenge faced by archivists is the shift from document-based archives to online-based formats. The mere understanding of the contextual relationships of archival materials is already difficult, and it was made even more challenging with the conversion of existing data to RDF. Resource Description Framework, or RDF, is a model for encoding semantic relationships between items of data so that these relationships can be interpreted computationally. The set of three entities that codifies a statement about semantic data is called an RDF triple, also called as semantic triple. This set of entities is the atomic data entity in RDF.
Thank you, and we hope you learned something.